Thank you so much for the early morning sessions, you too, and also the audience as well. The disclaimer before we start the session, we're a validator for both Berachain and Movement as well, and we're going to be providing infra services. So if there is any biased comment that's coming from you, it's, somewhat necessary. So please understand. So with today's session, I actually wanted to kind of like touch upon like the new projects that are coming to the scene, and as you are all aware of, like these two projects, especially Bera and Movement, like these guys are trending and considered as emerging new networks that we have to keep an eye on. And I was quite curious in terms of how these two networks will going to secure and get more liquidity to be allocated to them, because like considering the environment that we're in right now, we see a lot of the so-called mercenary capital or mercenary liquidity that is like hopping from one network to another, and it was exacerbated by the recent or latest like points program like trend as well. So I'm pretty curious how both of you as two founders of really like hyped in a way, like everybody has so much hype into you. How are you guys gonna like deal with it, and what's your plan in terms of like this year and next year of how you're going to secure and pin down those liquidity?
Yeah, very salient and a relevant question, John. I think for us, there's a couple different ways that we want to go about this. I think on one hand, a lot of Berachain is built around this concept or the building block of proof of liquidity in the first place, right? Which is a variant on delegated proof of stake. What it really means is that for Berachain, as the chain progresses, produces blocks, etc., those block rewards, that inflation, those incentives from the chain's progression aren't just going to validators, though I love you, John. They're actually going to the applications on the chain. They're helping them decrease their customer acquisition costs. They're helping them increase their capital efficiency. They're sort of building a relationship between validators and protocols on Berachain, and they're helping to fix that leaky bucket a little bit, even from an MEV point of view, because there's less incentive for a validator to have a toxic relationship with its application, reorder things, if it's also helping direct block rewards towards them. So I think that the answer to mercenary liquidity is to find ways to actually make it want to stay and for those yields to be good enough, right? I think part of that in our side naturally comes from proof of liquidity, because it means that those chain emissions are actually helping to boost people's yields. But I think what's even more important than net liquidity per se is useful liquidity, right? You can have whatever crazy like triple decker lasagna point program you want, and I think we've seen more than enough of these in the past. But I think there's also a very familiar pattern that we see on those point programs the moment that something happens. And I think that what actually matters is volume that's being traded through, liquidity that's actually being accessed, supply side, borrow side, how much is being generated in fees. I think all these things, along with your retention data, tend to be a lot more indicative of the ability to retain capital that is not mercenary than anything else. So I guess when I think about it for us, it's on one hand proof of liquidity. On the other hand, Berachain has very much been a community movement for a long time, right? It's something that we've been putting together, starting with a bunch of NFTs of bears with bongs like 3 years ago, and evolving into a full blockchain. What that means is I think over time, there's been a lot of opportunities for people to really start to care about something and to really be evangelized beyond the point of, hey, this is just an opportunity to farm some tokens and get out, right? I think that you actually want to optimize to some extent for irrational actors. Because if you have only rational actors, then when price goes down, you can have a lot of things happen. I think Blast was an example of what happens when you build a highly mercenary ecosystem and then incentivize people to take mercenary behaviors, right? And then I think finally for us is we think a lot about how we can actually help applications within the ecosystem get off the ground. Because for Berachain, it's not about how much TVL is parked on Berachain. It's about how many applications on Berachain have a chance of actually getting breakout adoption, which is very much downstream of those applications having liquidity and having real uses. So what we've actually done is we've partnered with a team called Royco that's been in the space for a while, and they effectively have a liquidity matching order book of sorts, which takes a lot of these processes that are happening behind the scenes right now, these liquidity raises, where someone will say, hey, if you give me 50 mil of TVL, TVL for 6 months, I'll give you X% of my token supply. It actually takes that entire process into a free market and allows people to almost build an intent matching order book for liquidity, such that you can actually achieve a little bit of what farmers and what people are looking for in those points programs in terms of multiple levels of potential yield, but with real expectations, with real tokens, and with the ability to have a number of applications getting out of the gates and achieving activation energy very quickly. So we think that by actually helping to build this program going into mainnet, and working with teams that are thinking deeply about how to make liquidity accessible to protocols, it gives us a real potential to have, let's say 2 or 3 out of those 15, 20 apps that are part of this program to start snowballing, right? And start picking up momentum and then trying to find their way to being that next GMX, that next base plate of an entire ecosystem. So yeah, man, I think of it in a couple different directions. It's proof of liquidity itself, which juices yields. It's building a community that actually cares about the product and actually cares about what's being built. So they're not solely focused on price action, but they're focused on the concept itself and believing in something. And it's building these programs that allow applications to really get off the ground in the best manner possible. Because as the chain, it's not about the chain being the main character. The chain should be an afterthought. It should be in the background. It should be about, are the applications actually making it out? Like, I don't think people would care if GMX was on base, right? I don't think people would care if Uniswap was only on, Arbitrum, let's say. It's more about, is there an application that people want to use, and does it have enough liquidity to really achieve a critical mass of users? So that's my long-winded approach. Sorry, Rushi.
Yeah, before we go to Rush, just can you briefly dumb down proof of liquidity as a concept? And a lot of people are actually confused about your triple coin structure, token structure. So can you briefly touch upon that? We're gonna move to Rush, and then I have so many follow-up questions for you. So
can't wait. So proof of liquidity at a very high level is effectively a variant of delegated proof of stake, and it's meant to really help align, I'd say, incentives between liquidity and security on the chain. In that on Berachain, in order to earn block rewards and in order to actually contribute to the validator set, in order to have a larger set of incentives as a validator on the network, you effectively, for blocks to be produced in a manner that is incentivized financially, you have to have liquidity provided. So there's 2 tokens. There's Bera, which is the staking token of the chain, and there's BGT, which is the governance token of the chain, and also plays a role in staking. Bera is what secures the network. It's what takes part in consensus. And it is what's used to bond a validator and to effectively, turn on the validator, if you will. It's that activation energy step. BGT, which can only be obtained by providing liquidity on the network, is actually what's used to allow those validators to produce larger blocks that have higher block rewards, right? So what it effectively means that in order for people on the network to earn more, and in order for people on the network to, have meaningful upside, there has to be a meaningful amount of liquidity there in the first place. And what that really means is that BGT ends up being, a liquidity-driven token, and Bera ends up being a little more of a security-driven token. And when you put them together, you actually get proof of liquidity. And when you think about this tri-token model, the important thing to think about is that BGT is entirely illiquid and cannot be purchased, right? The only way to earn it, as mentioned, is through this liquidity provision. At any point in time, it can be one-way burned into Bera, such that one can say, okay, I don't want to, take part in governance here. I don't want to earn fees or incentives for pushing my emissions towards pool A versus pool B. I want to actually just turn this into a liquid token and sell it or do other things with it, right? Bera, very simple, gas token, validator staking token. And then Honey, which is our stablecoin, is a little bit on the side. It's kind of it was once a tri-token model. Now I think of it as a 2+1 token model. And that's really something that's meant to help aggregate a whole bunch of these different forms of stable liquidity coming into the network. Because I think one of the issues that really does plague a lot of these new chains is you'll have 20 different versions of USDC and USDT and PYUSD, blah, blah, blah. And you end up with an incredibly fragmented set. So Honey on one side is a really fun branding tool. And allows you to start, permeating into other ecosystems. But on the other hand, it's just a tool for actually helping to defragment liquidity on Berachain and help people be as capital efficient as possible, while keeping in mind that, not all stables are made equal, not all bridges are made equal, and we have to be very thoughtful about its constituents, if you will.
Thank you, Rushi. Let's go back to the first question that I asked. But from your perspective, from your approach, I think it could be a little different from Bera. And I'm pretty curious on how you're trying to solve that.
Yeah, I mean, we're not doing proof of liquidity, but I think the way we approach it is touching on Smokey's point, Blast and other points programs. It kind of makes no sense because, let's say, for example, you're bringing in 2 billion TVL like Blast did. I would argue that Blast actually grew too fast because they had 2 billion TVL mainnet or the token launch, and if their token misperforms, which opened at not the best price, there's fundamentally no way that you can incentivize a capital. So if your LP put $50 million into Blast's pools, you got back $10,000. That's not Blast's fault. It's just like the token didn't perform well, which means like mercenary capital, especially during bear markets, makes little to no sense. I think it could make sense during like extremely really great markets where everyone's tokens at $40 billion, and we're all like geeing like exponentially amount of money. But I think like in any mid to low market makes no sense. So I think the way we approach is twofold. First, like touching liquidity raises, we partner with some great LPs that are providing day zero institutional LP liquidity, and that's for 6 to 12 months after TGE and token launch. So even if the token or the market is in the best conditions, we have institutional capital that is going to support us from day zero. So you'll see that for some of the biggest names in crypto. And I think beyond that, what sets us apart and we're focusing on is currently on Ethereum, there's no way to actually have secure asset storage. So one of the benefits of the Move language and the Move thesis was institutions and LP providers are sick and tired of getting hacked. Every year there's $4.5 billion lost in smart contract hacks, especially on Ethereum. Some of these biggest hacks are Arbitrum based on optimism, where there's no secure LP strategies, there's no insurance policies. So what we're working on with LPs is you're deploying capital, you're locked up for 6 to 12 months, but then you feel a sense of security because you have the Move security, you have the Move execution environment, which is different from traditional EVM. And then once you are deploying capital, you are getting missions, you're getting rewards that you've been allocated, you'll be like, oh wait, I'm not getting hacked on this execution environment. There's over 1.5 billion locked up in Move chains right now, and there's been 0 hacks to date. Obviously, at scale, we'll see how that plays out, but that's kind of thesis work for LPs.
Thank you. Since both of the projects are going through testnet phase, and I think you have seen multiple cases of how people engage with you guys. First, I want to go with Smokey. So, I mean, both of you are actually looking forward to token launches this year, pretty soon, I would assume, and we've briefly touched upon the importance of people won't care whether GMX is on base or Arbitrum, and you're expecting more DApps to be flowed into you with the proof of liquidity. And if that is the case, what is your I wouldn't go far too long, to 1 year or 3 year, but what is going to be your initial expectations of what type of DApps in your ecosystem will be actually bootstrapping and pinning down all these liquidity on your side first, Smokey?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of a barbell, right? On one hand, you have these sort of novel DeFi primitives and these applications that are really meant to be shelling points for liquidity that can just be massive sinks in a productive manner. On the other hand, there's these sort of more, I'd say, user-facing applications, or what they're calling consumer crypto nowadays. I have a rant about this. I think consumer is kind of a meme because it's almost okay, does that mean everything else is not meant for users, for consumers? Is it, you know what I mean? What is that? But projects that can ultimately get into the hands of end users, that can achieve distribution, that can really get somewhere, right? In terms of not just being the 10,000 people that are circle jerking on crypto Twitter, but rather getting out to hundreds of thousands, millions of people in a user-friendly and perhaps even somewhat abstracted manner, right? So I think on one side, we'll see a number of these sort of more interesting and complex derivatives projects and sort of advancements on existing structures that people know. I think the important thing is you don't want to always have to change user behavior, but you want people to be able to exhibit a very similar user behavior with a much better outcome. So for example, there's money markets on Berachain like Gummy and Dolomite. Gummy allows for very sort of exotic long-tail lending across a number of different assets. So it could be allowing you to basically borrow against different risk tranches. And their whole thesis is, borrow anything against anything, right? We've seen some approaches to this, but I think they've got a really elegant Oracle-free system that allows for some really, I'd say, interesting new collateral coming out the gates. There's Dolomite, that's a super modular money market that basically allows you to have, I'd say, more building blocks when it comes to what you can do with the yield of assets being supplied under the hood, how you can feed that back, how you can sort of bribe with it for more emissions, how you can turn that into its own set of flywheels. And then I'd say there's also some very spicy things that are more new and interesting in DeFi. So for example, there's a team at Exponents, which I'm a really big fan of. They've built effectively the first way to directionally incentivize longing or shorting. in that they've built a set of power perps and linear perps that are Oracle free and use a derivative of sort of like the Uniswap spot arbitrage mechanism. But for the first time, you can actually incentivize a user to go long or short on a perp, not just via funding rates, not just via being the LP and being the house and hoping that people lose money so that you make money by being the house and taking the other side of the trade, but rather actually saying, hey, I have a WIF bonk pair and I'm going to bribe people, or I'm going to incentivize people with X dollars in order to go long on bonk, right? And I think that opens up an entirely new degree of market dynamics that I don't think we've seen before, because it actually allows for this this community warfare that I think it becomes very interesting at scale if there's good distribution. And then on the consumer side, that I think will actually be a large, trap for liquidity as lots of people actually end up using stuff. One of the best projects I can think of there is one called Over Under that's building on Berachain. It's effectively allowing you to take a computer vision approach to Twitch streams, YouTube streams, Kick streams, etc., and automatically generate odds on events happening in game. So it's effectively computer vision powered prediction markets on streams, right? You can use it as a Google Chrome extension, and these guys effectively, train their CV algorithms on streamers, over the last, many months. And that way they can say, okay, what are the odds that this person gets 10 kills in this game? What are the odds that this person uses this champion? What are the odds that this person survives this skirmish, etc.? And automatically price that. And that's one where they can actually be the house. And then, people can partake in that very easily and also can bet very easily. Right? And I think that's something that could see a ton of consumer adoption if effectively rolled out. I think the overwhelming theme that we've seen and that I think is important when it comes to these testnet apps and finding ways to bring liquidity into them and finding ways to bring users into them is that you don't win by doing the same thing over and over again, right? I think just if we saw the exact same applications on Berachain as we saw on every other chain, then there would be very little reason for people to come there for more than a couple of months, right? So I think our process has always been, how do we empower the teams and how do we do the most to support people that are building cool, new, audacious stuff that we think actually has a chance of finding product market fit and maybe breaking out beyond that initial CT adoption bubble, or just becoming, the darling of the 10,000 people that care right now, right? So I think it's novel applications, it's DeFi, it's consumer, or user facing, and it's finding ways to actually build these foundational blocks that everyone can rally around. And I think the movement guys have been doing a really good job of this as well, because I think that I've seen and I'm hearing more and more about interesting new applications coming out there that you won't see everywhere else, right?
Yeah, I think, harping on what Smokey said, I think we want to focus all your attention on things that can't be brought to other ecosystems, because ultimately, after a token launches and the bear market hits, usually you'll see a fleet of developers and talent. Usually they'll take their DEX or lending protocol and bring it to 8 different chains. So that's actually not what we're trying to prioritize, and I'm sure Smokey's not prioritizing either, because that creates vampiric devs and vampiric builders. You're trying to, I think one of the benefits that we have, which is a blessing and a curse, is a different programming language. So there's actually no other place you can go really, because once we convert them, you're gonna build an app to us. No shade. But I think that what the thesis is, once we have a select core builder, so I'll shout out to Meridian is kind of our flagship DEX, liquid staking, and also validator client. So what's really interesting is that we have the shared sequencer. So when you are building a liquid staking product, you can bootstrap validators, which hopefully John and the A41 team will be running. But there's fully end-to-end DEX to liquid staking to MEV clients. So you can think of it like Uniswap and Jito built in for our ecosystem. So it's kind of an end-to-end app, because one of the biggest issues Jito sees in Solana is that they don't capture on Jupiter's fees, on Meteor's fees. So imagine you can combine Jito and Jupiter in one end-to-end app. So I'm really excited for what they're building. I think beyond DeFi, we're putting a lot of energy in Deepen, which I think is ultimately kind of a meme, because everything is Deepen. If you think about blockchain, Berachain itself is Deepen, because it's a system of validators that all are hardware. So kind of hate the word Deepen, but curse the industry for calling it Deepen, I guess. One thing we're focusing on is mobile. Obviously, we all have phones, and we all run phones every day. We have this team called Up Network that's building an end-to-end movement phone. They have their own mobile phone network. Each phone comes installed with all movement ecosystem apps, as well as each phone runs a light client for the DA. So if you want to verify transactions on the movement ecosystem and the movement blockchain, you can do that with the phone itself. So I think the way we're trending is if we, like, even recently, Telegram and the Tonic system is blowing up. All these Telegram mini apps actually have PMF. We can argue are those users real or not, but it's still more real users than a traditional DeFi app would have, or a traditional like consumer app would have per se. So we're putting a lot of intention into how do we bridge Ethereum apps and mobile apps. So starting off with an end-to-end device network, as well as we have like fully on-chain perps built in directly to Telegram, so you can long and short with vanilla, which is kind of a native perps platforms. So if you want to take a bet for one Bitcoin for $10, you can do that with a vanilla movement, as well as some other Telegram apps that we're pushing.
Thank you. I mean, since this is my conference, I can ask whatever I want, right?
Oh yeah.
Of course.
I actually wanted to kind of touch upon a few stuff. I mean, as we were talking about liquidity and DeFi, there was like recent criticism against Bera, and especially like focused on Smokey. Like, you know, there was someone who was actually pointing you out in the Twitter space, you know who. But in that Twitter thread, I think you were pretty calm and moderate when it comes down to responding to that criticism, but I feel like you would have a lot to say as well. Because if you look at the core essence of the criticism, it was basically saying that, oh, Bera is just repeating, just like other trending like, you know, networks that are coming out, like all the same like DeFi play. And then like when you first like saw that, like, you know, saw the criticism, what was your like first gut reaction like? Were you thinking that like on like at the little bit of a side of your heart, were you feeling that concern as well? Or is it like purely just like, hey, like, no, that's not true for us?
No, I think that like my first reaction was, who the fuck is this guy? My second reaction was, you know, this is a pretty weird attempt to farm clout. And I think my third was like, no, like, you know, I think that there's criticisms that we could definitely take, right? I think that proof of liquidity is definitely interesting. But I don't think it's important, or I don't think it's meant to be groundbreaking. Like, it's not important for it to be groundbreaking. It's important for it to be usable. It's important for it to somewhat resemble systems that people know, but also to be uniquely implemented such that you can actually benefit from that, right? And I think that the real crux of any argument there, and the way that I sleep well at night, knowing what we're building, is because I think that it's fundamentally new. I think that the applications that we're focusing on and the applications that are coming to Berachain very much create a culture of like novelty. In that, I think that if you work with good people and if you are good at what you do, you tend to attract good people as well, right? I think that application ecosystem has that same likelihood and has that same tendency to have that like attracts like. And I think that the important thing about proof of liquidity, whether that be for DeFi applications or anything else, is that it is really meant to be the ultimate tool to drive value to the application layer, which in turn is meant to drive value to users. And my view on the world is that in order for Berachain to make it, in order for crypto to make it as a whole, there have to be some applications that really that break out, right? That make it to some degree of mass adoption, or make it to some degree of incredible profitability that actually makes it worthwhile for people to use. And proof of liquidity is the first system that actually drives all the value into the hands of those apps and becomes an accelerant for the application layer. So on one hand, I think that I can look at our ecosystem and I can point to probably 10 to 15 very novel, cool new things being built in DeFi that are uniquely on Berachain, some of which I already mentioned to you. On the other hand, I think that I can very much point to a bunch of other applications that are wilder and I'd say more eccentric and like vape to earn type stuff that can also find a meaningful home there and actually end up being powered by proof of liquidity, right? Whether that is seen as, what's the right word? Whether that's seen as trivial or not. I think that what ultimately matters is looking at the ecosystem and what is spurred on by that base plate. So I think I was just more like confused than anything else. It would have made sense if we had beef, but I literally didn't know the guy.
Yeah, good answer. Like, I think it's like when you become a popular kid in school, right? You always have to, face these type of issues, whether you become the center of gravity of the the bullshit that you didn't even create, or sometimes you just become the target of criticism as well. Like, and the episode that I brought in is just one of the occasions, and I feel like the latest criticism on Puff Pow from Twitter is also could be considered as like like Bera is actually grabbing a lot of attention from a lot of the people in crypto. I just wanted to ask, like, at personal level, I think we've already heard about it, like, in our chat, but I personally, like, people would be also, like, quite curious in terms of, even though it's permissionless, like, people are building on top of Berachain, your personal view, like, as one of the co-founders and, like, the founder who's actually, like, leading the charge at Bera, what do you see from those projects, and do you think that there will be like EV positive, like net EV positive for Berachain at the end of the day, even when people are talking too much shit about those projects?
Yeah, for sure, man. I think that it's a weird world where we're like, on one hand, we need an entirely decentralized system. We need to make sure that things are permissionless. We need to make sure that things are governed by the community, et cetera. And I think, in a sense, Berachain is very much like driven in that manner, in that BGT goes to people who have provided liquidity. That's not just the investors. That's not just the validator set. It's people who are putting in that work, right, and who are providing useful value to the ecosystem. One of our APAC team members always jokes that like BGT as a fair launch token. That might be a little bit of a stretch. But what I think is fair to say is that yes, at some point everyone gets criticized if you make it to a certain stage. I think it's important to remain like humble and have your head on straight in this process, because I think I've also seen a number of founders that raise money or like maybe launch something and then just end up with their head like firmly up their ass in terms of like ability to interact with the real world and to understand what they need to do to win. I think that my personal view definitely plays a role in things, but I think that I also very much have to respect like the views of my team, the views of the ecosystem as a whole, because I don't think everything will succeed on Berachain. Like I think that there are many projects that will come and they won't feel right for the ecosystem. I think there's a culture, there's like there's a brand that's being formed, right? I think that it's important as a leader, as a co-founder within that team, to be able to have an opinion, but I also think it's very important to let things take their natural course. So the way I see myself for the rest of the team, if you will, is like guardrails. Like we're there to make sure that people don't do anything way too stupid or like anything too excessive either. But we're not there to mandate one outcome or the other. We're there to basically just help dampen effects a little bit and help course correct when necessary. Because at the end of the day, it's not our viewpoint that matters. And that's why, while I am opinionated on certain things, I've been, I think, more and more trying over time to not be extremely opinionated. I think you have to be opinionated to a point, right? I think that what Toli and what the guys at Solana do is quite thoughtful. In that if you don't have like product leadership, if you don't have someone who cares about whether it's outcome A or outcome B, I think you trend towards zero, like you trend towards disorder. But I also think that if you have a full out like Nazi state, then you also trend towards zero. So I think that a lot of these things that we see on Berachain will be weird. I think that they will be thought-provoking. I think that they will have cognitive dissonance. There's a dude in a fucking bear mask on the stage at your conference. Like, a lot of what we do is not overly engineered, but it's also thought about to some extent in terms of, I think grasping a little bit of attention, not in a manner that's meant to be extractive or a manner that's meant to be toxic, but just, okay, how do we make something that people might resonate with and might actually care about and cause them to think like more than once, right? And actually just revisit that and be like, why the fuck did I listen to that panel with the guy in the bear mask, right? And I think that is sort of a lot of what we think about. And I think that a lot of the projects that end up in the bear ecosystem will be wacky. They'll get a lot of criticism. I think some will get a lot of love. I think that they'll overall do really well, because I think that there's like just a group of high octane, like unhinged but very competent builders. Like left curve meets right curve is really what I think about a lot. And then you sort of get that horseshoe, if you will, where they're all the same.
I actually want to like go back to Rushi a bit. Like when we see, I mean, just like Smokey said, when we see like Smokey and Bera, like it's very community driven, and like in Twitter we see Bera like at least once per day, and like it's also Cosmos SDK chain in a way. So like people are more familiar. Whereas as you've mentioned in the beginning, like movement has a unique strength, as in that like it is written in Move. So it definitely will enjoy like certain advantage over Solidity based networks. However, at the same time, that will limit you or uniquely handcuff you in terms of like the size of the ecosystem you're tapping into first, and the size of the dev pool that you're tapping into first as well, and the community-wise as well. Like, you know, Bera started off as an NFT community, whereas like for movement, like it's very different like approach that you guys have to take as a founder. Like, how are you trying to like make movement to be on top of the surface as well, along with Bera and along with like Mona and all these like huge giants that are coming out. And a lot of people have also like, you know, high hopes on movement as well, and on you too. But it's just that like, you know, when it comes down to attention economy, we have this guy who wears mask and comes to the conference. He just like grabs all the attention. Like, how are you like trying to approach things like, you know, differently as you approach the launch?
Well, I think it's like you can't fork it. You can't like force it either. I think like both L1s will do phenomenal, and like that's not really like what we're focused on. I don't think it should be. Like, we're not in the space to like fight for the same 5 developers and like the same 5 tweets on Twitter. I think like the thesis is like if we are going to actually get adoption for this thing, there's ultimately going to be multiple chains that all have their own PMFs and use cases. So I think to that extent, like like on your first point on like developer adoption, I call it like the spicy EVM, we joke, where it's like we are even compatible with the interpreter, so it's an interpreter that lives on top of the Move VM, so you can deploy Solidity code out of the box. So we recognize that Move is the new language, and it's still coming to market, like early days of Solana with SVM, but we still say like a majority of the apps are EVM and Solidity, so how do you bridge the gap? So you have EVM interpreter where you can deploy any EVM code directly in the Move VM out of the box. And I think beyond that, the way we look at it is like we have probably a different go-to-market. I think we have a lot of more work to do on DevRel side because we're kind of advocating for this new language and the framework and trying to challenge the existing status quo, which is the EVM. And I think like even going back to Smokey's point, like Solana and Toli, like that's what they had to do for the first few years, right? Until like I would say 8 months ago, everyone thought Solana was dead and it was going to zero. But for 4 years, essentially, Solana, actually 5 years, Solana and Toli have been pushing SVM, pushing Rust-based programming, and everyone didn't really believe it until Solana hit $150 and then, or $120, and now everyone's like, oh, like SVM and Solana is the future. So I think like ultimately these things are market-driven. We look at it from a long-term horizon where we believe in secure programming, we believe in Rust-based programming. So I think our DevRel and approach is focus on developer adoption, focus on converting new developers to Move, and once we can do that, we essentially win that battle. And I think like we do a lot of work with community and rolling out our degen vibes. Obviously, we won't be the Berachain. We can't replicate that. I don't think anyone can. Maybe someone else, maybe a VC will try to fork it, but they'll try miserably. But yeah.
I would just add really quickly, like I think that what Rushi mentioned around Solana is like pretty important. I think having a high pass filter for people who want to build, like it's like you wanna like weed out people who suck early, right? And if it's too easy, then you might get a lot of people who are just trying to grift. And I think the Aptos ecosystem in Sweet, like I think they had a bunch of that to start, but then all that like, you know, all the chaff and the wheat separated, right? And I think that, like Toli used to say the thing about like what devs have to like E-class or whatever to build on Solana. I think that if you find like, you know, if you find people who can actually end up being trauma bonded to some extent by like the difficulty of a given experience, then I think you end up with a very successful community base, right?
I think it's also when you're ecosystem building, you can't like be permissionless and like be laissez-faire, right? But I think that's what the past L1s have done. They're like, we build the tech, it's so good, the tech is phenomenal, and people will come build. And they will build before your token launches and before the bear market hits. And you'll be the most hyped L1s, like Apple Sweet like 3 years ago, were like the chosen ones to kill Ethereum, right? And then now if you look at the ecosystem, I would say it's rather nascent because a lot of those developers felt slighted, they didn't feel helped by the foundations, and they moved on, right, ultimately. So I think like this cohort of chains is like growth by incubation. So whether it's king-making, call it, whether that's directly helping builders are cool, I think the market has shown that you have to choose your 5 or 10 winners, and then you have to push those 5 or 10 apps to compete with every other app or ecosystem, right? So I think across the board, you're seeing that with most L1, L2s, where you essentially have 5 or 10 apps that are pushed by foundations and ecosystems, and then those 5 to 10 apps are fighting with every other chain.
I think you're touching on a really interesting point here. So essentially, we're all here for to advocate for the decentralized networks, right? I mean, we're infra provider. And we are essentially like sustaining the decentralized networks, no matter how people like think that we're contributing to staking centralization or whatnot. But like I've never been in that like in your shoes basically. So like if you were to balance out between, I mean, I think Rushi like mentioned a very good point about like being permissionless from the get-go may not be the perfect like start. How are you thinking about like each of you are trying to balance out that sort of a permissioned way of approach and a permissionless way of approach? Like, yes, you've briefly touched upon like picking the 5 to 10, not picking, but like 5 to if there are to be the 5 to 10 like winning apps or winning like forces, you might want to push them a little bit as a foundation or like something like that. But how are you thinking about trying to do that? And also what's going to be your decision points in terms of when to switch off to like full permissionless and how long you want to like stay on like permissioned in a way or hybrid of permission and permissionless?
Well, I think every network is permissionless, right? Like you look at Arbitrum, Optimus, etc. But ultimately, I think what we learned is there's only 2 or 3 apps that people actually use, right? So for Arbitrum, it's like GMX that drove all the volume, and maybe like 1 layer 3 gaming chain, right? Like there's only like 3 or 4 projects that actually drive volume for chains years after maturation. So I think when we look at it today, it's like the chain itself should be permissionless. Anyone can deploy. If you want to run a meme coin, you can do whatever you want. But as a foundation, especially as founders, you only have energy for X amount of projects at a time, right? So if you only have X amount of energy, you have to focus on making sure your top apps are crushing it. I think the era of like 400 plus apps building on top of us is gone. No one really cares because most of those 400 apps are grifts or like airdrop hunting, which is fine. It has a time and place for that. But I think if you look at a 10-year or 5-year horizon, you need there's only gonna be like 5 apps that really exist.
Yeah, I think for us, same vibe in that we are entirely permissionless, and people can deploy whatever they want, right? But I think you're talking about like soft power, right? You're talking about like, what is it that you king make or don't? I think that for us, I think that we don't try to king make projects. We do have, I think the closest thing to that, or the closest thing that's been perceived as that, is something that's called Build-A-Bera that we run, which is like sort of an arm of the foundation that acts as an incubator. It's actually a lot closer to an accelerator right now in that while there's a dedicated team that's meant to help with projects, it's basically helping, I'd say, curate just like 5 really strong companies every few months and helping them launch in the Berachain ecosystem from the earliest stages. And it's often that we meet a team and they have one thing missing. Either they've got a great product but have no idea how to fucking talk to people, or they have a great idea how to talk to people but have no idea how to build tech, or they've maybe got both of those things and have no idea how to fundraise. You know what I mean? Like there's some part of the equation missing, and we do our best to help work through those teams. And it makes a lot of sense at the seed stage, and it's more than anything meant to set a very high bar for performance in the ecosystem, such that you can start getting those flywheels and those like attract like, where you have a whole bunch of people that say, hey, this is a really cool product that was built on Berachain. Maybe I should build something cool there too, right? And you start forming the right type of a builder community. I think that we try not to basically put the foundation resources apart from like Build-A-Bera behind any specific application, because I think that the moment you do that, the moment you start giving out like grants or like token warrants, whatever it is for application A versus application B, you can't undo that step, right? And then everyone will say, oh, you gave this guy a grant, why can't you give me a grant? And you just set a very like toxic and dangerous precedent. So I think what we try to do and what is reasonable in the eyes of a decentralized system that still has some form of centralization in that there's a team, is that we basically say, here are the here are the guardrails, like I mentioned, here are the things that we think are interesting, and the market could very much decide otherwise. The market could say, fuck you, this is stupid, we don't think that this should get funded, we don't think this should get built. And I think the market ultimately decides. What we can do more than anything else is lay out potential blueprints or lay out a potential roadmap. And I think that's reasonable. I think that means that the foundation is dialed in, the foundation is hands-on to the right extent in terms of having opinions and having thoughts on what is necessary, but not being too heavy-handed with that to a point at which it feels like other people cannot succeed in the ecosystem. Because as Rushi said, if you look at any application right now, it is very generous to say that there are like 10 apps that people actually use on it, apart from ETH mainnet, right? And maybe Solana. It's actually a lot more reasonable to say like, there'll be all this like random shit that has like, $500 in TVL, and then there'll be a couple breakout apps that win every chain. And I think that part of allowing for the best breakout apps to occur and to come to life on that chain is for people to believe that they have a shot at making it. So in my mind, you almost want while you want a broad ecosystem, you want to believe that there is a set of, let's say, somewhere between 25 and 30 apps that are constantly cycling and have the opportunity to be that top one on the chain, right? Or top 5 on the chain, whatever you want to call it. Because you don't want just like the same old forever. But as the market changes, as different metas evolve, you want people to be able to evolve with it as well, right? So I think you almost want like a set of 5 or 10 that are really, really solid, that are just foundational base plates in the ecosystem, and then a whole bunch of ones underneath that sort of build around it. Yeah, and I don't think that the foundation or us can manufacture that outcome. I think it's very much a product of of entropy.
Yeah, since we're running out of time, I would ask just last question to both of you. When will we be expecting you guys to launch your tokens?
Before the end of the year over here.
Likewise.
Okay. Thank you guys. Thank you so much.